So welcome to our first positivity bias discussion. We are using the book Positivity Bias by Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, which is practical wisdom of positive living, inspired by the life and teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And our guests this evening are Jeff Sack, who's the current national commander of Jewish war veterans, also a Chicago cop for 25 years, and Zev Elias, who's retired neurosurgeon with 38 years in the ER Trauma 1 unit. And my name, of course, is Chaplain David Grossman, and look forward to sharing our ideas with you. So the book we're looking at is focused on, we all have a bias, and sometimes we're aware of our bias, sometimes we're not aware of our bias. And the idea is to conscientiously make decisions about, what we want to do with that bias. I'm currently also the Great Lakes Regional Diversity Officer with Civil Air Patrol. And one of the things we talk about in diversity is the biases that we are aware of and the biases we're not even aware of. And there's some interesting university tests that you can take online to kind of get a sense of what those biases might be. But oftentimes we're unfamiliar with them. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe made a conscientious decision early on to focus on the positive. And there are times when he talks about it, but usually it's just something you just see, that always he chooses to find the positive and see the positive in every situation. And you're talking about, it's one thing to have a bias on things because, the world around you is good and everything is sweet, right? But you're looking at men who, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, he lived in a communist regime where to display any type of Jewish faith or investment was against the state, was against the country, not legally, but it was taken that way. And punishments, came with that. He instituted an entire underground yeshiva system, a day school system, to continue Jewish education when it was forbidden to have a Jewish education, and at penalty of life and limb. It was a secret program. It was kept, where no one knew who the others were, so that no one, when tortured, could be able to, share details of what else is going on in the system. And he focused and kept that whole system underground running. I remember years ago, we used to joke that Chabad is everywhere in the world that you can find Coca-Cola, except Coke isn't in Russia, and Chabad is.
No, never heard that before. That's interesting.
That was years ago. Now there's Coke in Russia as well, but back then it was, wherever you can find Coke. But it was an underground system of yeshiva education, and a lot of people were killed. A lot of teachers were captured and killed for doing so. So it was a very serious situation. And you'd think someone in that kind of situation would have plenty to grump about. I've spoken with veterans who talk about complaining as a right within the military. But this is
Not
something
happy if they don't complain.
Say again?
They're not happy if they don't complain.
That's right. So that was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. His son-in-law, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who would eventually take over the mantleship of leadership, was also in a situation, they were both able to get out of war-torn World War II, war-torn Europe. But I think the Lubavitcher Rebbe got out on the last boat that actually got out safely. But it wasn't easy getting out. Of course, the previous Rebbe, when he got out, he was a part of the Warsaw Ghetto and was able to be, with all kinds of secrecy, was able to be gotten out of there and brought to America. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe also was the last boat out. He was hiding in Paris for a while. He went to the University of Sorbonne in Paris, but during the war, it was hiding out and eventually, escaping the area. But major challenges. They both lost family in the war. So they're coming from really tough times with every legitimate reason to complain and see all the negative in things. But what was fascinating is that when the previous Rebbe passed away and the Rebbe finally accepted the mantleship of leadership. So good leaders, when they start, they talk about, this is the goal of our generation. This is the goals of what I want to see in my tenure as leader. And the Rebbe did no less. At a Farbrengen on Yud Shvat, 5732, which was 1972, the Rebbe continued the work of the previous Rebbe, meaning that the last discourse the previous Rebbe had shared publicly was called Bosel Agani. And that's the first words of the mimer, the discourse, but it's also the title by which we go by it. And for the rest of when the Rebbe took over from his father-in-law, he started his tenure with reviewing the teachings of the last discourse from the previous Rebbe. And that Bosel Agani. So each year, the Rebbe would take one paragraph of the original Bosel Agani, and he would expound upon it at great length. And after finishing it, he'd start all over again and start with the first chapter over again and discuss it at great length, going through it. But the very first part.
That a little bit, the Basi Logani or Badi Logani, that's part of the Song of Songs. It's just like that's the fifth chapter of that.
Yes. So he's taken a phrase, the previous Rebbe took a phrase and then expounded upon the depth of what that means. And
unusual, what do you call it? The Song of Songs is unusual to begin with. It's a kind of a graphic love poem.
Yes. And when one studies the mystical teachings, you find that the physical world corresponds directly to the spiritual world. And so when we talk about a physical relationship between a man and woman, spiritually, there's a whole thing going on. And the male in the spiritual sense is God, and his betrothed is the Jewish people. And so when King Solomon was writing Shir HaShirim, it's a passionate love story about the Jewish people and God. And yes. And you know what? All of those details have a mystical correspondence to them. So for example, when we talk about kisses of the lip, is correspondent to the learning of Torah, because the Torah is God's will and wisdom. And when we devote ourselves to the study of the Torah, then that's like kisses of the lips between the Jewish people and God. So all of the details that are in Shir HaShirim and the passionate love story that's there is all a physical manifestation of a spiritual entity that's going on between God and the Jewish people. And so what the Rebbe has done is go into greater detail in each piece of this. So in regards to positivity bias, it begins with this idea, and I'll quote here from the book, which is quoting from the Rebbe, but the Rebbe was setting the stage, right? When we look about with physical eyes, we only perceive the physical aspects in all that we see, and we naturally wonder what's happening with the world. The situation is steadily deteriorating from one generation to the next, and even from 1 year to the next. Goodness does not prevail. Conditions are not improving. Holy and spiritual values do not dominate. Such thoughts could easily lead to the conclusion that this world is but a jungle, dominated by selfish beasts, and that it certainly does not remotely resemble a garden that yields delectable fruit. Bosel Agani, I came into my garden, my sister, my bride. Such thoughts also lead to dejection and despair. How can we hope to affect and change the world for the better if the situation is constantly degenerating? There's some phenomenal books that are written about the Holocaust that talk about the indomitable spirit of people in the worst of suffering situations. And we'll come back to that. But I think the idea of you have a choice. how you see it, as Viktor Frankl talks about in his book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And again, he was a psychologist going into the concentration camps. And so he spent a lot of his time looking at what's going on, figuring out what's going on in the concentration camps, and seeing, how some people, even in the worst of situations, found ways to focus on positive things. So it comes a choice, right? So back to something that Rebbe talked about, making the choice. So the Rebbe says, we must know that the world, it is a garden, and not just a utilitarian field that yields grain, which is necessary in order to subsist, but a luxuriant garden that yields precious fruits that provide color, aroma, flavor, beauty, and pleasure. And moreover, this world is not just anyone's garden, this is God's garden. And as the verse states, Bosulagani, I have come into my garden. Its goodness is therefore measured according to God's infinite pleasure, God's infinite terms. And with this perspective, which we're choosing to have that perspective, we're able to view the world differently, and we begin to notice things that we may have missed upon first glance. When we realize that it's our responsibility to constantly search for God and for the good, we endeavor to look around us and perceive that which is beneath the shell, the fruit that is under the peel. We're confident that we will successfully uncover the garden that is latent in creation, because the Torah tells us that it is indeed there, waiting to be discovered. And knowing their precious treasure awaits discovery, we remain focused on our task. We do not allow ourselves to be sidetracked by other endeavors. And we must know that we inhabit a wonderful world. And through contemplating the above, we may assuredly traverse through life, secure in the knowledge that we will find the fruits of God's garden. So it's a choice we make. It's a focus on how we choose to see the world. If we're going to, I always like the saying, we could complain because a rose bush has thorns, or we can rejoice because a thorn bush has roses. It's how we focus, right? It's how we focus. I remember a time when my wife and I received some very bad news. And it was that her brother had died suddenly in a hang gliding accident. And we had to fly out for his funeral. Because we're trained, as Hasidim, we're trained to focus on the positive. So there's the initial shock and the initial disappointment. But then there's the focus, then we start focusing and talking about, the good pieces. He was with good friends. He was on vacation in Hawaii. He was a pilot for American Airlines, but he loved to fly free. And he was flying in Hawaii. He was flying when he passed away. He had a hard landing. And as a surgeon, so Zev, the diagnosis was that the artery had ripped off the aorta, and he had internal bleeding within minutes. So we focused on the fact that he died quickly, and not, in that case, it was not a long, drawn out process. My father suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia. Here this was for my brother-in-law, it was a quick end. He died in his wife's arms. He had been snorkeling with dolphins out in the bay the day before. So we start looking at all the positive things to find solace in the positive things. But that comes from the training. But the question I would pose for you guys is, I've got to know both of you a little bit, and you both do have a positivity bias. You definitely go that route. And where do you think you picked it up from? Where did you learn to focus on the positive?
Jeff, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm at a loss for words too. I
Okay.
don't know where I picked it up from. I mean, if I did it any different way, I think I would be like Rabbi Schneerson. I wouldn't survive the life I led as a cop, or I think the military experience was just long and boring sometimes. But even there, being assigned to the desert, I could look around and say, gee, I've never been here. There's so many different things to see. And how many Jews get to experience Saudi Arabia? You know, now it's going to be different. But back then, 30 years ago, that was you know, a long time since we had prayed there. It was, like I said, a unique experience. Like I said, a cop, you see a lot of bad things. And you have to, well, you have to have a police sense of humor to get through the day sometimes. For a positive attitude, well, I think Judaism helps me with that sometimes. I like the analogy that this is God's garden, because we're gardeners. It's our job to keep the world, how should I put it, a decent place. Pass the buck to you now.
I mean, I came from I guess more or less a negative background. My parents are Holocaust survivors. My father, as a teenager, was taken from his household, and his parents were killed in Auschwitz, and he was in a work camp. After the war, met my mother and got married, and then moved to Israel in 1949 after the state was founded. And lived there for 10 years and came to the United States when he had a medical problem that they could not deal with at the time in Israel. And my father was very bitter. It's something he never discussed openly, but he lost both of his parents. And between both of my parents, they lost 22 relatives. And so I could understand certainly the feelings that he harbored. But they moved to the United States because they wanted their children to have a better life than what they had. And I had two older sisters. I was the first in my family to go to college, and I kind of viewed that more or less as a challenge. My parents both had nursing backgrounds, and so I volunteered in the hospital, and I learned that I could hopefully try to do a little bit more if I became a physician, to direct the care of patients and to try to help them. And that was my objective, is to try to help people in a way. And that's why I went down the medical pathway.
But where did you pick up a positivity bias coming from that background?
It was just to be at the opposite end. I mean, again, my parents came to the United States to make a better life for the children. And I wanted to make good on that.
Okay. And you chose to go that route. So anybody, for both of you, any influential people in your life that as mentors kind of helped mentor this concept of a positivity bias?
Directly, no. I don't know that I experienced that directly. It really, it was a self-driven motivation. I don't know. I'm not sure anything came from. Yeah, I guess the only thing when I was in 8th grade, and I was a little bit rambunctious, as I was turning, I guess, about 13 or so, short-lived, thankfully. And my art teacher wrote in my yearbook something to the effect, he wrote, to someone who's trying to become something but never will be. And that was a tremendous motivation for me, to prove this guy wrong. So it really came from a negative direction. I was trying to make, trying to show him that I was going to be something, even though he had no confidence. And also my high school career guidance counselor. Oh my goodness. You'll never make it in college. Don't even bother trying to apply. You know, it's just those kind of attitudes just kind of gave me a drive to try to succeed.
So there was an obstinance born within.
Yes, yes. That's the Israel. I was born in Israel. I mean, that's the Israeli way. The
I will
sabra.
be happy just to prove you wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I'll make my career, my entire life mission to make that so.
Wow. Well, you'd never know that you came from that by the smile on your face and the happy conversations we've had as well, because you've definitely turned that around. You've made that a part of life. Jeff, any mentors along the way?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I came from my father's side, a very large family. Uh, and my mother's side, some very close relatives. My great uncle, my great aunt. I can't say that they had that positive attitude, but they were always so kind to me anyway. And I, I can tell you, when I was in high school, I was started at 5 foot in a Chicago public high school and was quite harassed growing up. And maybe that affected me into going into law enforcement so that nobody would ever do that to me again. I always had an interest in the military. I can't say why. I think maybe because of that large family, everybody had served in World War II, and they talked about it. But I found in life that I liked helping people rather than hurting people. And, as a police officer, you can go for days and not have good things happen. But every so often, once every 2 weeks, you do something that is very positive and it makes your month. I whether it's bringing home a lost dog or rescuing somebody from a fire. I mean, it's these little things that make up for all the bad stuff that you see.
Right.
Yeah, the opportunity to do good and share kindness.
And those outweigh all the negative experiences.
Yeah,
Those few encounters that you may have, as you mentioned, will outweigh the negative experiences that you have.
when we talk about our military experiences, I tend to remember the good stuff. You can probably jog my memory and bring back the bad stuff, but
Yeah, my mom always said I had selective memory.
when it comes to my wife, I have selective hearing.
And another thing that I was raised with was my parents were not very well off. We were probably lower middle class, I guess. But my father always raised me with the attitude, a rich man is one who is happy with what he has. So that, even in kind of a poor background, if you will, happiness was emphasized above riches.
Right.
That's a good expression.
I think in my lifetime also, there was always, my father was always the one about making sure things are done right. He was an engineer, chemical engineer, and it was always about doing things the right way. And so there was a definite influence that way of just making sure, things are done right and properly and complete. But my mother's side was always, like you said, with kindness. Everything was about kindness and open house, Southern hospitality was just an absolute part of growing up, hosting people and a commitment to service, a commitment to helping others and serving others was just always a part of that. So I'm we talk about the positivity bias, part of it's, coming from a negative. So we literally, we made a choice to focus on positive, right? But we also focused on kindness, doing kindness and being good to people. I think that's an important piece of that whole thing. What's this focus of kindness and positivity? How have you seen it manifest in your life? How have you seen it make a difference? because you chose the positive?
I never even knew I had this positivity bias. I never thought much about it.
Likewise, yeah.
In retrospect, now do you see it?
Well, I realize I could be looking at things a little differently, and that would not be helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you call it, but I really like the concept of tikkun olam, making the world a little better. I mean, what's my purpose here in life? I'm on a quest. I call it a God quest, okay? Because God doesn't talk back to me. I'm telling you as a rabbi that I pray, but it's a one-way conversation. But there's got to be something greater. And what's my purpose here? You know, and we believe that, I'm not sure if I believe that this is the center of the universe, as the chapter was trying to point out that that God created this as his garden, but it is God's creation. There is something greater than us. There's order in the universe.
Yeah. And so you spoke of tikkun olam. Has that been a guiding force for you?
I like to think so.
Zev, you were going to say?
Everything I do, whether it's taking out, sorting out recycling, and just even the little stuff. Not being wasteful.
Yeah.
Having,
Of course, you get what you give. So yeah, kindness is a good thing too. I probably have too many toys.
Zev, you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to comment on. I just moved here about a year ago to Florida and have become involved with Chabad, and the Rabbi is. I've read some of the Basi Lagani, and I learned some of the teachings from the Rebbe about the world was created, man was created to bring Hashem down to the earth, to be with man, and so that he's everywhere. And you can either look at the world as I don't see miracles, or you see a miracle in everything. And every day in the operating room, I would see a miracle. An anesthesiologist puts the patient to sleep. It's like magic. They put to sleep, some state of suspended animation. I do whatever I do to try to help that person, and hopefully they wake up in a better condition than when they went to sleep, and we've helped them.
Well, that reminds me, by the way, anesthesia is just amazing. I can't remember
anything
about that.
It is. That's exactly right. And you have amnesia when people wake up, so they don't remember being put to sleep or what happened to them. But as far as manifesting kindness, towards the end of my career, about the last 10 years or so, actually became much more involved with teaching. We started a training program for surgeons at our hospital. That was sponsored by one of the local medical schools, and so we got very involved with teaching of not only trainees to become surgeons over a 7-year training period, but also medical students, even college students. And that I actually enjoyed towards the end of my career, enjoyed that much more than the surgery itself. Just imparting, trying to, especially for surgeons, trying to impart humility to the next generation, so don't let their egos get in the way of talking to people and taking care of people.
So you both had leadership responsibilities. How did you convey? I probably didn't even realize you were doing so, but how did you convey this necessity for positivity and kindness, tikkun olam, this idea of making things better for others? How did you get that across?
Well, I would always tell my trainees, I told them and I treated them like my own children. During my training, we used to refer to one of our professors as Pac-Man. I don't know if you remember that video arcade game where this guy would sneak up behind you, whack and he just bite you in the butt. You kind of melt away. And that's the way the surgeons of the generation before me trained us. You know, it was very it was very hard because it was very almost I wouldn't say abusive, perhaps verbally abusive, not physically abusive, and in some way belittling. But it was kind of a rite of passage, if you will, I suppose. But I vowed, and I know that other people in my generation vowed not to do that to the next generation of trainees, and that's what I try to do, is to focus on, was to treat them like my children and impart good values, to them. First and foremost, not just surgical skills, and thinking through thought processes, but the concept of humility. Meod meod hevei shval ruach, be exceedingly humble in spirit. And the rest of it says, because the anticipated end of mortal man is worms. We all end up in the same place. So you're no better than anybody else, no matter what position in life you're in.
How does that help you get a positivity bias?
It keeps me from not looking negatively on people. You can put yourself at a place where you think you're better than other people, and view them negatively, and therefore you must be better because they're negative and you're better by some measure, whatever that measure may be. But that's something that I never wanted to experience, and certainly didn't convey to any people that I trained or worked with.
There's a story about that the Rebbe told about in generations past. A previous Rebbe, when he was a child, reprimanded by his father because he was putting somebody down, and his father reprimanded him and said, "You can either put someone down, or you can lift yourself up. And if you choose the latter, then you're being an example for the future." So the same effect, You don't need to put someone else down. Lift yourself up, and you'll be greater. But that means that the world can be a better place as well. Right. Jeff, how about in your leadership? How did you work on helping people focus on a positivity?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to a lot of memories. Let's go to Desert Storm. I was a reserve company that I was commanding during Desert Storm, and a lot of them were my peers. They were fellow police officers. They may not have been the company commander like I was, but on a day-to-day basis, when we weren't drilling, we all wore blue shirts and did the same job. And I think when we got mobilized, I realized that the traditional military way of running a company was not going to work. That I had to treat these people like equals, and if we received orders, I explained the orders and didn't just give orders. Here's why we're doing this, and here's the everything they told me, and I sold the concept, and we would go from one step to another, and we were all going to get through this together, because that way we would all get home, and we all did get home.
Thank God.
And I kept me going like that. Plus, it's treat others like you want to be treated. I mean, Hillel basically said it. My mom said it. The golden rule works real well. Even as a police officer, when you're making an arrest and you've deprived somebody of their freedom, don't treat them like a total dirtbag. Treat them with respect, and you have an easier time managing them, and maybe even help them through the situation to better themselves from it, move forward.
So with kindness, we focus on the positive, and we demonstrate the positive through that acts of kindness.
I hadn't really thought about it as kindness. It's just the way you should treat somebody else.
Yeah. My son recently, he has been for the past few months. He's been up in Alaska, and he got his license as an EMT. And part of his responsibilities was to work at a homeless shelter, one of the largest homeless shelters in Anchorage. And during this pandemic, everyone was being tested before they came in. Well, somebody snuck in that had a positive test. And so my son was informed that so-and-so tested positive, bed number 34, you need to get him out. So in my son's mind, okay, there's a mission. The mission is we got to get him out for his own good, for the safety of the people around him, for the safety of the staff that's there. And furthermore, if they don't get him out and it starts to spread, that whole shelter will be shut down, as another shelter in town has already been shut down. And now all these homeless people won't have a place to go, and the staff won't have a place to work, won't get paid. So there's a lot riding on this mission. And he understood that, but he also knew that he had to wear proper PPE to protect himself. And he had to go to this homeless person and say, I'll just use the name Bob, but he said, Bob, you need to come with me, and we're going to have to get you another place. You can't be here. You've come with a positive idea on pandemic, and you're dangerous to other people around you. We need you to move to a new place. And he was using all the logic and all the details of the mission, and he was getting nowhere. And one of the other workers there saw the situation, and he asked, hey, would you like some help? And my son said, please. This person stepped forward and said, hey, Bob, hey, I got a really nice hotel room for you. It's got a private TV. We're going to bring you breakfast and bread. You've got a private shower. We're going to take care of you. We're going to get you a nice, good spot, and we're going to help you get healthy. And the guy got up and he went. It went from what other people need to, hey, what we're going to do for you.
Right.
And by acting with kindness and focusing on the positive things we're going to do for you, not the lack of negative, but the positive things, he was encouraged, and he got up and he went.
And sometimes other people have good ideas and can carry out something that if you get the job done and it's better for everybody, what works.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to wrap up with one last question for you. Why is it critical for our service members and our veterans to choose to focus on positive? Why is that essential?
What do you want to talk first? I can address this. In the military, the positivity bias, we call it positive mental attitude. And you can accomplish a lot when you have a positive mental attitude. If you think you can't do it, you're going to fail. So yeah, you want to have that positive mental attitude, the can do. The Marines will take the hill. They will go through the hill. Nothing stops the Marines. Yeah, so yeah, when you develop that, we call it esprit de corps or morale. But when the morale is low, let's call it a negativity bias, that you don't get things done. And sometimes the morale is so, but if some people have that positive mental attitude, you will get it done.
Excellent. Zev.
You will accomplish the mission.
Yeah, certainly. Just to touch on really what reinforced what Jeff said, the esprit de corps, the working together as a team is very important, not only on the battlefield, but certainly in the operating room as well. If everyone has their role to play to make the mission succeed, or the operation, the surgery to succeed, and if everyone does the job that they're supposed to do and do it properly and focus on what they're supposed to do, then you'll have a successful outcome. And that's what the esprit de corps is all about. No matter where you are in life, whether it's, you know, on the battlefield, the operating room, on the police force, out on the streets day to day. That's very important all around.
Beautiful. And I think we'll talk about the same concept when it comes down to resiliency as well. You know, to be able to bounce back from whatever your down is. You know, that's the tracht gut wird sein gut, as we say in Yiddish. You know, think good and it'll be good. It's that positive attitude. And we'll cover more about that in future sessions. But this is a great start. And I appreciate y'all joining us. We'll continue to go chapter by chapter and discuss the ideas of the benefits of a positivity bias, but also how you do it, because it comes down to a choice and learning how to choose the positivity bias and build the esprit de corps and to stay focused on all the good as opposed to being dragged down by some of the negatives. So we'll ask everyone to join us again next week.